Welcome to another episode of the Brotherhood Effect podcast. I am your host and big bro or little bro, T. Before we get into today's podcast, we want to take a moment to acknowledge one of our sponsors, Palmetto Game Truck SC, where gaming dreams roll on wheels. Their gaming truck covers birthday parties, corporate and non-profit events, community events, and much more. For more information, visit palmettogametrucksc.com for information on pricing and availability. All right, before we get into today's podcast, I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone from our Black history, like I referenced in our last episode, that each episode for the month of February, I will be quoting something from a Black historian. So today we are going to talk about a Black historian named Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Dr. Clarke was most known and highly regarded for his lifelong devotion to studying and documenting the history and contribution of African Americans in the country of Africa. And today I'm going to read one of his quotes. And the quote reads, "History is not a matter of what happened, but what is remembered and retold. To be calm in the midst of chaos is a form of strength." End quote. This quote reflects on the importance of maintaining composure and perspective, especially in challenging times. So as we dive into the discussion items for today's podcast, I want to focus on 2 points that I believe are very important in our efforts to keep calm and carry on. The first point is what we call triggers or trigger, and the second is a concept many of us are familiar with, that is conflict resolution. In my efforts to tie these two together, one could ask, without spending too much time on a particular point in time in history, what is something or some things that triggered you to respond in a negative way, and how do you manage the stress associated with it? For my bros in a relationship, one could ask, how do you manage triggers within your relationship? And what steps do you take to address conflict when or if the trigger is the cause of the conflict? So before we go any further with that, I think it's important that we at least stop and define the word trigger. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, a trigger is something that causes someone to feel upset and frightened because they are made to remember something that has happened in the past. A trigger is something that sets off a flashback, transporting the individual back to that traumatic event. So if I were to pull a personal experience of my own, I can honestly say that growing up in New York as a kid, we just didn't have much. Not going to hide it, not going to sugarcoat it. You know, my mom, like I said in episode 1, you know, she did the best that she could do with the resources that we had available to us. But I can honestly say that in my young adult life, there has actually been a point in time where I became extremely nervous when it came down to budget and finance, and not because I wasn't good with it, not because my wife wasn't good with it. It was just a trigger. Like if the account didn't look a certain way, if I didn't feel comfortable with what we had going on, I'm bean counter, got the budget, got the spreadsheet. And if we did something to deviate from what the plan was, hey, rent's due on the first, like water, gas, blah, 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 blah. You get it. If we deviated from what I had outlined on a spreadsheet as to what our expenses should be, it threw me into, I don't want to say panic attack, because I don't think it was that serious, but I can say that my OCD was elevated to the point where that was a trigger for me, and it threw me automatically, no cap, right into conflict with my wife. Questioning what she's doing, what you doing in your account. I'm looking in her account like, hey, I saw you went to lunch. You spent $10.59 at McDonald's. What did you get? Why didn't you take lunch? Hey, I saw that you stopped at the shoe store. You picked up some shoes. You gotta understand, And I'm just going to be completely honest. It's not that she was doing anything wrong. I mean, she makes her own money. She's entitled to spend it on whatever she needs to spend it on. Obviously, I have a certain system set in place as it pertains to our family personal finances. But again, my OCD and hey, you went ahead and spent $10 like we one step from bankruptcy. It's just one of those things, bros. I mean, it's a trigger for me. And it's not, and I'm not going to say it's a bad thing. It's just, it's the product. You're a product of your environment. And when you come up in environments like that, you obviously are going to have a certain mentality. When I get older, I'm going to work hard and I'm going to change the trajectory of my life. It makes me think about caste systems, how you were born in one caste system and you died in that caste system. But essentially, when you're a hard worker and you're working hard to change some generational curses and you're trying to change the trajectory of your life, a lot of times you're trying to do whatever you can to prevent yourself from going back to where you came from. So here and now, there was definitely, and I'm gonna be full transparency here, there was some conflict, to the point where we would often have those discussions. So that's just one example. I'll give you another one since we're in the same vein. Again, this is going back to that OCD tendencies, and I think that's just a part of my personality. So I'm very detailed oriented. So one trigger that me and my wife, we used to have that discussion, is about clean up and laundry. I'm like, not to say that my wife did not clean up, not to say that she didn't do laundry. She just didn't do it the way I wanted it done. So, and I think, again, when we're talking about conflict resolution and we're talking about triggers, it's like, hey, I don't feel like you did a good enough job with it. And my thing is, I know me, I would angle my questions a certain way. And then if I really just got to the point where I was just completely fed up, then I'm just coming out guns blazes. And we just, again, like I said earlier, we in full blown conflict. I'm like, well, I don't feel like you ain't doing your fair share, or you saw this was there. Why didn't you do it? Oh, I was getting ready to get to it. You didn't get to it soon enough. You could have got to it a few minutes ago. I walked around that spot 3 times and I saw it there. And I seen you. And here, this is funny. I literally would be very analytical to the point where I would watch my wife's movement and I would say, hey, you walked past that spot 3 times. At least out of those 3 times, you could have at least hit that spot twice and got it. You can tell how animated. I mean, at the time, this is hilarious. And I remember when I was younger in my marriage, and it's so funny. And I'm gonna get back to my point. But I think my even approach as a young man, and we grow in grace, we grow together. I used to tell my friends just jokingly, I'm fighting every fight. In other words, I'm coming into the thing ready for some conflict. Everything that is going on that I don't particularly care about, we gonna hash it out. Then it gets to the point you just arguing about everything. So at the end of the day, I think that with me being a New Yorker, born and raised, one thing I can tell you, if you've never been to New York and you don't know anybody from New York, New Yorkers are very cocky. New Yorkers are oftentimes overconfident. New Yorkers are loud. So there'd be times when I'm just talking to my wife regular voice, she's like, "Why are you yelling?" I'm like, "I'm not yelling at you." It's funny. I'm just talking to you in my regular tone. She's like, "No, you yelling." I'm like, "I am not yelling. This is just my tone." But again, it throws us into conflict because my tone was a trigger for her. So again, when you think about a relationship, married, single, interpersonal relationships, workplace relationships, whatever, I feel like our triggers oftentimes make us who we are, the things that set us off. So when you're growing in grace and you're in a relationship or whatever type of relationship it is, when you look at the concept of conflict resolution, how do you mitigate? How do you decipher? How do you address triggers within your relationship and utilize those triggers or utilize those experiences to help move your relationship forward. How do we do that? What does that look like? And then when we talk about the concept of conflict resolution, that kind of ties into the whole thought behind this podcast of keeping cool and carrying on. Not letting conflict, not letting things that happen within the confine of our relationship, or whether it's things that happen in our everyday life, prevent us from thinking logically, prevent us from staying on top of our P's and Q's. And we have to realize that in our relationships, like I was saying earlier, whether it's marriage, there are going to be marriage, dating, there are going to be things that are going to happen that you're just not going to understand. But my thing is, you have to take time to understand the individual. Now, granted, when you're at work, that's different. You're there to earn a paycheck. You're not there to learn, the movements behind some of your coworkers and things like that. You're there to do your job. But when we're in a marriage, or when you're in a relationship that is developing, you must take the time to know your partner. And you must take the time to ask some of those probing questions and try to get an understanding of the mindset of an individual. And that doesn't mean that because my wife is in OCD about budget and finance, that like I am, that she doesn't know how to manage money. Or I could say it's just because my wife doesn't pick up or clean up on the spot like I do, doesn't mean that she's an unclean person. It's just a matter of what is priority for her, what is on her mind at the moment. And when you process the weight of all the things that you may be thinking about, what is important to you? Everybody doesn't have the ability to quickly transition from one thought process to the next. But again, it all is about being patient. And now we'll get into a little bit about conflict resolution. So, conflict resolution is the process of finding an agreement to end a disagreement. I think that's really good. It involves listening, understanding, and working together to find a solution that everyone can accept. So, with that being said, I guess my first question is, are you the type of person that focuses on the conflict rather than the solution? I mean, let's be honest. I'm going to talk about me. At some point in time, when me and the wife used to get into it, I mean, I was just focusing on, I'm mad. I don't want to get past it. And my wife she's definitely the type that wants to try to make peace and find a resolution to move on past it. But me, I was the type of person, I want to dig my heels in. I want to know why you did what you did. I want to get behind. I want to get into the mental psyche. I want to understand the thought process when you did what you did and the reason why that thought process triggered you to make the decision that you made. I mean, it was extreme. And I mean, I'm saying it in all honesty, but this is good humor. But I mean, it's just interesting. At that point in time, I'm fighting every fight. I want to get into the nitty gritty. And obviously, I'll just be honest. I was getting on her nerves. She was like, "Man, I'm sick of him. He is driving me crazy." But that's how it was. My wife wanted to get to the resolution. I'm too busy focused on the conflict. So I think, brothers, the one thing that we have to understand, and this all transitions to whatever type of relationship it is, whether it's again interpersonal, coworker. I mean, don't be so quick to focus, or don't be so hard pressed that you are focusing more on the conflict than the resolution. Don't be so angry all the time. I used to be like that, mad about stuff, mad about what I don't understand. So I think the key is understanding, how to get to the resolution. But first, you have to make sure that you are just not focused on conflict. The second concept, or the second thought here, that do you take ownership of the part you play in the conflict? All right, brothers, let's keep it 100. You want to keep cool and you want to carry on. But keeping cool and carrying on is not just saying, hey, that person is the one that did everything. So I don't have nothing to be worried about because I didn't do nothing wrong. Stop right there. Especially if you're talking about a relationship, spousal or whatever case, you don't want to just be like, hey, I'm the victim in all of this. I didn't do nothing wrong. I did not have a role to play in the conflict. It was all them. And I was just the recipient of it. No, you don't want to be like that. What role did you take in the aspect or the issue? Some people love to highlight what everybody else does wrong. But they fail to see themselves in the situation. So are you the type of person where you only can see what everybody else is doing, but you cannot shine the light on yourself and take ownership for what you did? Again, we're talking about conflict resolution. And this is all going to tie into keeping cool. Next thing is, this is very good. Are you defensive? And I even went so far. Let me give you a definition for defensive, or let me give you some discussion points about it. So people often become defensive in relationships because they feel threatened or perceive criticism, which can stem from underlying insecurities. We're talking about triggers, underlying insecurities, past experiences, or judgment, or a fear of conflict, leading them to protect themselves by reacting defensively instead of openly addressing concerns. Now, we've got to be honest about it. Everybody's experience when it comes to conflict is not the same. Like I was saying earlier, I grew up in New York. It's a very interesting environment. Rah, everybody's on edge. You used to conflict. You're used to it. It's a part of it. But everybody in this world is not used to conflict. Everybody doesn't. Some people don't know how to handle conflict, and their initial response is to shut down. And I think when I talk about me and my wife, and this is me just shout out to her, her initial response to conflict is to quiet. She gets very quiet. I really would have to push the envelope to the point where she would get angry like that. Now me, I'm quick to anger, and I'm a work in progress, like we all are. But again, when I was a lot younger, I was quick to get to anger, and I'm quick on the conflict side, but slow on the resolution side. So I think as I've matured and become more of an adult, and I take, and like I said I'm very detail oriented when I want to be. But when it comes down to trying to establish that resolution, I'm very slow to getting to that. So, obviously the maturing process, you grow in grace and you realize, all right, I need to change some things to be a better person. I need to change some things to be a better spouse. I need to change some things to be a better sibling. Because when I was younger, me and my siblings, we have at least a 5-year gap. 5 years between me and my brother, and then 10 years between me and my brother, and 5 years between me and my sister. So, when you're talking about conflict, the conflict was different because of the age ranges. But again, you have to really focus on what was conflict and resolution. What did it look like when you were a kid coming up? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. When I talk about the concept of or when I think about conflict and resolution as a kid coming up, it was just, you do as you're told. And I think that's a lot of the old school parenting style. So this is not me like taking a dig at my mom. My mom, she's older, she's come up in a different time. The positioning between the parent-child relationship was different back then. So it was no, hey, what's your opinion as a child? No, you do what I tell you to do. It doesn't matter whether you agree with it, or it doesn't matter how you feel about it. You just do what you're told. So when you talk about the concept, was conflict resolution taught in the home as a kid? Did they teach that back in the day? It was just do what I said. It don't matter what the conflict is. You gonna do what I said do, and then we gonna reach a resolution. The resolution is you doing what I told you to do. The conflict is that you didn't do it. So again, as adults, and even now looking at parenting in today's modern society where kids are exposed to a lot more technology. I'm not saying that they're just exposed to a lot more. So you have to be a little bit more strategic with how you communicate with them, because their brains develop at a different pace than ours did because of technology. We've got AI, we've got so many things going on. So anyway, when you bring it all back full circle, what was conflict resolution like in my household versus conflict resolution in my wife's household? We also have to factor in the fact that but we also have to take into consideration household size. There was not a father figure in my home. So, a lot of times I struggled with, managing conflict. Why? Because of triggers. And I also had underlining issues with how to express how I feel about things because of anger. So again, I always used to make the comment, and this is still true today, that our experiences make us who we are. So the way that we were raised, some of the things that we encountered as young adults, and how we process those things do matter, and it dictates, or it's very influential in how we look at things today. So when we talk about how to resolve conflict, and then I'm going to tie it into keeping cool, the first thing you got to understand, and I'll give you some tips, how do you resolve conflict? And this can transition across, or this is applicable to all types of relationships. So the first thing that we have to understand, and when you're talking about conflict, you have to listen actively. This isn't one of those dictatorships where, the male and the female, and the male might say, well, what I say goes. You have to be attentive to the other person. Focus on what the other person is saying and try to understand their perspective. Now, I think that when I was a lot younger in my relationship, this was very hard for me because our perspectives were not the same. Hence why communication is so important, because you really have to talk about things to get an idea of what that person's perspective is. For example, I'll go there. Me and my wife have a different perspective on discipline in children. Why? Because I came up old school. Mom said, hey, you go get that switch, you in trouble, you about to get it. There wasn't no, hey, I'm gonna go to my daddy, and my daddy gonna get me out of trouble. It wasn't none of that, because there was no dad in the home. Whereas my wife had two parents. So her experience when it comes to discipline and things like that are different. So me, I have had more dialogue with my wife, and we've come together to try to figure out a resolution and a combining of the parenting styles, and figuring out, hey, how do we want to approach things? Because these kids are a little bit different. So the question is, and again, when we talk about old school, you got that spanking, but did you really understand why you was getting the spanking? Because then you turn around and you do the same thing. Did you learn the first time? So there has to be some education here, and the child has to understand what they did and why they shouldn't do it again. So again, listening actively or listening attentively. Next point I want to talk about is communicate openly. Express your feelings and ideas clearly and respectfully, and be open to one another's ideas. Hey, I think that in a relationship, you've got to be open to someone that has opposing views. And then again, you find a commonality to meet in the middle. Because a lot of times, even in marriages, dating, whatever the case may be, this is all just relationship management. Next point, avoid blaming. Don't name call or assign blame. You might want to be like, well, it was you that did it. Let's be honest. I mean, bros, wife might do something, be like, yo, it was all you. You did it. I was trying to reach a resolution. I was trying to explain to you my feelings, and you just da-da-da-da-da. And you laid it out. And you know what she did? She got defensive. And then you know what happened? There was no conflict resolution. So again, the blame game, the finger pointing, I mean, it sounds ideal in the moment. You upset, you want to do that, but essentially you don't always get the response or the resolution that you're looking for when you do the blame game. All right, coming down to my 2 key points here. Compromise. That's the dirty word. That's what they say it is, but I believe that word is essential for peace. So now we're driving it home when we're talking about keeping cool. You want to find the compromise. And compromise doesn't always mean win on one side, lose on the other, but how can we meet in the middle? And meeting in the middle, you might be like, well, I didn't do nothing wrong. But again, it's not blaming anybody. It's just trying to have some dialogue to understand the cause of the conflict from the beginning. Was it a trigger that created the conflict? Was there miscommunication? I mean, what happened to cause the conflict from the beginning? And are you in a good place where you can have meaningful discussions about a resolution? I understand, hey, sometimes you might want to take a second, get your thoughts together. You might want to go talk to one of your homeboys, be like, bro, let me tell you what happened today. Let me get your perspective. But in the end of the day, what is your common goal, or what is your your primary objective for the relationship? So when you think about what your end game is, compromise is going to be a part of your end game. And if I was to tell you to write that down, that would be compromise is essential to your end game, which is peace. Next one, collaboration. Both parties working together to address the underlying issue and meet everybody's need. Now, again, we're talking about the word compromise, and then we're talking about collaboration. So I feel like when you bring the temperature down and everyone gets to a point where you can compromise, then you can talk about collaboration. So you're giving up a little bit of something. I'm giving up a little bit of something. We're bringing down the temperature. We're not being defensive. And now we can have some meaningful dialogue to help push our agendas forward. So what does keep cool and carry on mean for me when we think about triggers? First thing we have to acknowledge within ourselves, what are some things that set us off and cause us to respond the way that we respond? And I want to shout out my older brother. We had a conversation probably about a week or two ago. And he was talking about how he was in a venue and somebody said some things to him that was off the wall. Now, it's interesting because what the person said to him was a trigger. Now, where I took time to celebrate him is to celebrate the fact that if this person had said what they said to him about 10 years ago, my brother would be in jail because he was just at a different point in his life. And now, fast forward, lots of years, he's got a different perspective on things, and he handled the situation a different way opposed to him handling it the way he would have handled it when he was a young man. So I think it's important to celebrate, progress, but when we're thinking about keeping cool and carrying on, we're looking at our investment. How invested are you in whatever type of relationship that may be, or the value of that friendship? When you're in a marriage, and I'm going to talk to my married bros, I'm going to just spend a little second dialogue about that. You're not always going to win every argument, and it's not about winning. It is all about compromise, and this is coming from somebody who in the beginning said, hey, I'm fighting every fight. I came in with my arms up, ready to battle, because I think as a young man growing up the way that I grew up, we've always had to fight, just fighting to make it in this world, fighting for survival, just fight. But eventually you get to that point where you're tired of fighting. As you get older, you don't have that fight in you like that anymore, and you're really focused on peace. And what can I do to have as much of it as I possibly can as the children grow up and you get older? So I also think that in a relationship, when you're having meaningful dialogue and you're communicating, and you have to take time to talk. You have to take time to not only talk about what you're upset about, but you have to talk about your feelings as it pertains to the relationship. And when you think about you're doing life with this person, or whether you're dating whatever the scope of the relationship is, you have to take time to communicate your feelings, and then you have to take time to show interest in how the other person is feeling, because a lot of the answers that you may seek could potentially be in a question of, hey, how are you feeling today? Now, don't get me wrong. As a bro, I want my wife to take interest in what's going on with me. I want her to show that she cares. And the problem is with that, and we have to take a second to step back. I mean, when you think about the hustle and bustle of day to day, you know, you got work, you got issues with that. If you got children, you got that. There's so many moving parts to what we do each and every day. Sometimes people just have difficulty managing everything that they got going on. And because we are so prideful in this day and time that we live in, nobody is going to be honest and say, you know what, I don't have it all together. And even if they are transparent and they tell you, I don't have it all together and I'm just holding on, are you prepared to offer a resolution? And what does that look like? And this is where I'm going to tie into my next point, of conflict resolution tips. So the first tip I would say is you definitely want to find a good time to have that conversation. And it's not always a good idea to have that conversation on the cuff of conflict. You definitely want to have that conversation when you're in a good space and you both are able to have that conversation without being defensive. Number two, you want to plan ahead. And then you want to acknowledge if there is a problem, and then clarify what the source of the conflict or the rub is. So for example, if it's finances, what does that look like? How do you have that conversation? I think one time I was telling one of my other bros about every year I think it's good to just have like a financial planning meeting with your spouse. I mean, it is what it is. You just got to really sit down and you got to come up with a plan. Hey, what are some of our financial goals and objectives are for the year? What are some things that we'd like to do? What are some things that we'd like to accomplish? Do you have any savings goals? Do you have kids? What does that look like as far as savings is concerned? Do you have life insurance? What does that look like? Sit down and talk about that, because finance is one of the top issues with the marriage or any type of relationship, because it takes finance to make it all work. One other thing is you have a private and honest meeting. You might need to schedule a date night, and you might have to really sit down and talk about it. You don't need to bring your laptop and your glasses and you got Wi-Fi. You bring a little notepad, or you write on a napkin some things, and then put the napkin in your pocket. And just talk. And be like, hey, let's have an honest meeting and let's talk about where we are and some goals that we have and develop a plan. It's always good to try to plan ahead if you can. I know it's easier said than done, but you have to make time, because again, when you're not planning ahead, sometimes that can be a trigger for somebody that is a planner. Remember that. So, evaluate how things are going, and then lastly, identify and implement takeaways. So, you don't have to have a strategic planning session, but again, it is still a good idea to spend time communicating, and I think that's key, going back to some of my points. So again, trigger, conflict resolution. So as we come to our close and we talk about keeping cool and carrying on, I just want to say to my bros that no matter what it is, no matter where the area of conflict is, whether it's in your relationship, in your marriage, if it's on the job, you have got to do a good job at remaining level-headed. And when I say remaining level-headed, being a strategic thinker, whether that's in your career aspirations, whether that's in your marriage aspirations, whether that's in your retirement aspirations, it's always good to not make decisions out of anger. It's always good to not make decisions out of desperation. And if it's something that you can put a pin in and pick it up tomorrow when you have a clearer head, do that. That also ties into conflict within a relationship. Sometimes when there is conflict, the best time to talk about it is a few hours later. Hey, let's just cool our heads off. Let's take a break. I don't think we're getting anywhere right now. We really need to take some time and take a few minutes away from each other so that when we are talking, I can talk to you with a clear head and not out of being defensive. Again, because when you're defensive, at the end of the day, nobody's trying to hear the other person's point of view. And like I said, people often become defensive in a relationship because they feel threatened. Again, and then the objective or the goal of conflict resolution is the process of finding an agreement to end a disagreement. So I'm trying to end the disagreement. I want to keep cool and I want to carry on. So no matter what, bros, remember that you always want to keep cool and you want to stay level-headed, because that's when you're going to make some of the best decisions that can impact your life. I can remember lots of times where I made decisions out of anger and I was upset. And then I went back and I was like, you know what? I could have handled that a different way. So remember, my bros, whatever decision you're making, whatever conflict that may be coming your way, just remember and be aware of what your triggers are, and don't be afraid to address them. The key is you don't want to go back to that trigger and live in that moment. But you want to take that trigger and let it be an opportunity for you to learn and be like, you know what, that is an area within my life that I definitely have struggled with, and I want to be better. And I want to find a way to turn down the temperature on that so that I could be more effective in my daily life. So again, my bros, appreciate you taking time to listen to what I had to say. I trust I've said something that has helped you. And again, if you're dealing with conflict or you have dealt with it in the past, or should conflict ever meet your doorstep, just remember, keep your head level, know who you are, know when to walk away. And at the end of the day, you got to be able to move on, because you got to stay focused on the big picture and what your end game is. All right, my bros, until next time. Peace.